Hey there, tie up your sleeves, put on some gloves. It's time to play with fabric dye. Hydration break. Have you watered yourself today? So, of the various ways of getting design onto fabric, embroidery, printing, block printing, screen printings, things like that, dyeing and weaving, I have been learning embroidery. I've done some block printing, and now I'm moving on to dyeing. Weaving is somewhere far in the future. My experiments so far with dye have been with tie dyeing and with ice dyeing. And those have been both pretty fun to do. The tie dyeing, when I first tried it, I used RIT dye. And this was supposed to be a much deeper, darker red. And instead I got pink. So I want to learn how to fix that. I have since bought some Dharma fiber reactive dyes. These are for cellulose fibers, so cotton, linen, rayon, what have you. And I have read directions. I have watched videos, but I learn best by doing. So that's what I'm gonna do. I want to learn, how do I actually pre-treat the fabric with soda ash? Because I've seen conflicting instructions on that. I want to learn what are some really fun and good ways of applying the dye, and what are some good ways of resisting the dye. As a disclaimer, the way I shot this video was pretty chaotic over the course of a couple of weeks, but I've edited it so that it plays more linear for you. So there might be things in the background behind my hands that I haven't explained yet, but don't worry because I'll get to it probably in the next clip. I am going to be a little scientific about the soda. I have 4 strips of fabric here. This is just a bleached white muslin. I have marked them with Sharpie, which is an alcohol marker, so this whole process should not affect those markings. I am going to boil it in the soda ash. I am going to soak it in the soda ash. I am going to mix the soda ash in with the dye, and then my control, I'm not going to use soda ash at all. And I want to see how much that affects the dye. Other thing that I'm going to do is I am going to, once these have been treated with soda ash, except for this one and this one, I'm going to cut them in half, and then we'll do a hot and a cold for the dye. So whether or not I am heating the water as I'm dyeing the process, or whether or not I'm doing it as a cold, say, like the ice dyeing method. First, I'm going to mix in the soda ash. Now, it says to do 1 ounce by weight of soda ash per gallon of water. This is not quite a full gallon. I'm not going to be like super precise about this because I do have a scale that I could use, but whatever. Tablespoon. So that's basically a liquid ounce, which is not going to be the same thing as a weight ounce. So I'm just going to go ahead and scoop some of this out, put that over here, and then put in my soaking. Turn this on, get that water boiling, and then I will put in this once that's boiling. I'm going to do this for half an hour before I move on to the dye. For you, magic. I decided not to do the hot without soda ash just because seeing how the cold without soda ash turned out, there's not really much point. So this is really interesting. The heating of the dye bath changes the color drastically. I can't believe how much different these two are. These are the ones where the soda ash was mixed directly in with the dye bath versus these ones which were the ones that were pre-treated. So just how much different of a color those are is just mind-boggling to me. I had no idea that was going to happen. Just a reminder, these are the fiber reactive dyes from Dharma Trading Co. These are very clearly meant to be used cold if you want to get the right color out of them. I have only rinsed these. I have not yet washed them. And what's the point of dyeing clothes if you can't wash them? And I'm just going to give these a quick hand wash because no point in throwing these in my washing machine. And I'm going to see how much, if any, of the dye washes out and or remains when it's done. I have added these now into my sewing journal. All of these were done at the same dye concentration, which was 2 of these large scoops per cup of water. So this is roughly a teaspoon. So I've just marked that down. That seems to be the sweet spot for concentration. I will keep that in mind as I do further dyes. One of the things that I want to experiment with is resist, and this one is a removable water-based resist by Jacquard. And the idea of this is you use this to paint around the outside of an area that you're going to fill, and then after the dye is set, then you wash this away. It separated. It says separation is entirely normal. Go ahead and give it a stir before you use it. Oh, that is really gross right now. I have a paint mixer. We're gonna give that a try. Yeah, this stuff is just so thick. Probably don't need very much of this. This is just a synthetic cheap brush. If this is the version that I decide to go with of just doing darker, deeper flowers on everything, I'm going to cut myself a stencil for applying this more quickly than brushing every single one. The whole point of this stuff is so that you can have very precise spots of dye without having to paint like a large area with the resist. So I'm going to let that sit and dry, and then we'll come back and have some fun with the actual dye in a little while. So this weekend, I went to the Sewing and Stitchery Expo and picked some of the Resistad water-based Gouda. This is the stuff that's supposed to be better than the other stuff I had. They're both made by Jacquard, but this one is a better formula. I also wanted to try by Jacquard. This is just a fabric paint, which is acrylic, and I wanted to see how well this works as a barrier, because one of the techniques is to use a permanent Gouda, which is a metallic gold, and basically so that won't wash out. picked up a couple of silk painting dye kits and was talking with Evette, who does the studio on dyeing. And one of the things that she actually recommended when doing her silk painting is that she uses magic sizing, which is basically the same stuff as this. It's an iron-in or a spray-on starch. And when she sprays her fabric with the magic sizing, lets it dry, and then uses a fairly dry mixture on her brush, that she can paint more like watercolor. So I want to go ahead and try that with the fiber reactive dyes here on the cotton as well. All right, I'm gonna let that dry. Got some little air bubbles in there, but whatever. The water-based Gouda I have heat set with a heat gun, so that's supposed to give me a more crisp line. And then this section over here, yeah, oh geez, I can even feel where the sizing spray is. So I'm gonna mix up some dye, and we're gonna see if it makes any kind of a difference. So, see how much that spreads versus... Yeah, so that spreads where it's wet, but where I had it mostly dry, it barely spreads at all. So yeah, that does definitely make a difference. So yeah, where I have more water on the brush, it's definitely spreading out. Compared to if I do the same thing here, it just spreads like wild. So that is really neat and really good to know. Yeah, the dye is just going to stay right there inside the border and spread. Yeah, so I don't need to worry about it going into the areas I don't want it to, because it's not going any further. It's definitely bleeding within that area, but it's not bleeding out into the other areas. And that's really kind of fun, because you can get that gradient going. Let's go ahead and try it with the Gouda. Huh. Why isn't it bleeding over here? That is really interesting. I did not spray any sizing here. Oh, it is bleeding a little bit, but not nearly as much as it was in the middle. Maybe I'm just not using enough liquid? Yeah, maybe that's it. Or maybe it's because this area was heat treated first, and so just the fabric itself. Huh. I would not expect the fabric to take the dye differently in these two different areas, but very clearly what's happening. So now I'm just going to try heat treating this area and just see if that does make a difference. Well, neat. So you can see where my brush was still a bit on the damp side, but once I got towards here where it was really dry, definitely did make a difference. The next thing I wanted to try and do is see how this behaves through an airbrush. So I have this airbrush is a airbrush specifically made for makeup. It works great for paint too. It is a gravity feed, single action, nothing fancy, nothing special. So yeah, it does not seem to bleed where I apply it with the airbrush, so that's pretty neat. Okay, so it looks like it is maybe bleeding a little bit after the fact, but definitely not as much as having done it with the paintbrush. So that's interesting. I think that means that I could potentially create a stencil of the flower and use that as a mask to quickly apply that shape rather than having to paint in each individual petal. So I've got another test that I want to try. One of the things I really enjoy is tone on tone embroidery, like white work. I wanted to see, since these threads are technically cotton, they should also dye. But then it's also common to wax your embroidery threads. So I'm going to try doing some stitches with unwaxed thread and some with waxed thread. This is the DMC crochet cotton in a number 12, and this is the DMC floche. Both of these are ecru, and the cotton that I have here is an unbleached muslin, so it's not quite as bright as our previous experiment, but it is what matches the thread that I have. I forgot to pre-wash the fabric. Even so, what this does tell me, which is what I wanted to do the test for, is that these threads from DMC, which are cotton, will in fact dye whether or not I wax them beforehand or not. And that is a pretty solid color match for this fabric that was in fact pre-washed. Both the crochet thread and the floche did really well. They still have their sheen to them. It's got that little bit of shininess to these threads. That's good to know. I do look forward to doing some embroidery on some fabric and then dyeing it after being embroidered, because I think that would produce a really neat result, provided I make sure I wash my fabric before I embroider it. Overall, I am super glad that I did all of these experiments. I have the reference now in my book. I'm going to try and do some time tests where I see what 5 minutes in the dye bath, 10, 15, so on looks like in that dye bath. Because for each of these, I did probably about 30 minutes. But I want to see, can I get lighter colors by leaving it in lighter, or should I just add more water for lighter? Things like that. I am looking forward to buying more colors from Dharma. By the way, not sponsored, but links in the description. Because I've only got 5 colors so far, and I need a lot more. I really love the way that this little blending experiment went. I didn't talk about it much in the video, but it was a lot of fun just to try and get a smooth gradient. I'm looking forward to actually doing a little bit of embroidery on top of this. That'll be just a fun project to do in the evening. And then for the resist, these were really interesting. The Gutta versus the other resist. The Gutta versus the other resist. The results were considerably different for me. You can see just how crisp the lines are here where the Gutta washed out versus this one, which, disclaimer, I didn't actually add enough mordant into it. When I went to rinse the resist away, well, it kind of still bled the dye, and that might have been maybe too much dye, or it might have been the resist. But either way, this one, I don't know if I'm going to do too much with that other resist. The Gutta with the gold metallics definitely, and definitely with the spray starch and heat treating. because I think between those, these lines are super sharp. This is after rinsing, after drying, so they've lightened up a bit, and I would need to do a second coat to get a really deep color, second, third coat. Those are so crisp compared to here where it wasn't heat treated, and here where it wasn't even with the spray surge. That's more things to play around with. I am really looking forward to trying this silk painting kit that I picked up from the Sew Expo. So look forward to that video sometime in the future. I haven't decided on my next project. I've got a pretty long list. Thinking maybe I need some shorts for summer, and well, there's the silk painting kit. There's also making an apron, things like that. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If there's any other experiments that you'd like to see but don't have the method to try them yourself, let me know down in the comments and I might just do it. Are there any videos that you recommend of people doing things like silk printing, fun tie-dyes, things like that? Go ahead and leave those also. And we'll see you back here in a couple of weeks for my next video. Bye.